Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Whiskey Uncorked. My name is Brian, and surprise, surprise, we're back with another Scotch whiskey review today. This time we're going to be talking about a category of whiskey that I haven't really talked about a ton on this channel. We'll get into why in just a second, but yeah, we're talking about a sherry forward official bottling this week in the Tamdhu 15-year-old. So, sherry forward Scotch. I have probably only done a few reviews of this. I've only been around for coming up on a year now this November. And actually one of the first big things that I did was a whole big series on bias, and I reviewed a few Dalmores in the final video there. But beyond that, there's only been a couple here and there, particularly when it comes to the official bottling range. And not getting into those special releases and that sort of thing. So why is that? Why haven't I reviewed many of the sherry forward official bottlings when there are quite a few of them out there? It's a really popular just category of Scotch in general. Not just enthusiast-focused whiskeys, but luxury-focused whiskeys. Most of those are going to be sherry forward, as well as many of the entry-level whiskeys have some degree of sherry influence on them, if not a relatively significant amount. Is it because I don't enjoy this style of whiskey? Well, that's certainly not true. I very, very much enjoy myself a sherry forward Scotch. But similar to the way that I felt about kind of your 10-year-old heavily peated Isla official bottlings, I've kind of had a similar view on these in the sense that they're somewhat interchangeable for me, and that kind of makes it difficult to review. Now, that is not to say that they all taste the same. Many people say that bourbon all tastes the same, and I have to strongly disagree with them. There are a ton of differences between the different distilleries, different areas in which it was produced, and just kind of the way that it's made, provided that you drink them on a regular basis and you kind of take the time to get to know them. You can really start to discover all of the nuances and subtleties and things that can make bourbon a very diverse category of whiskey. And I have a feeling that it's probably something similar with the sherry forward whiskeys for myself, in that I got in the mindset that they are all relatively similar. We're talking pretty similar degrees of quality and relatively subtle differences. And that might just have been a problem I created for myself. Now, before I go any further, I do want to kind of clarify something. I'm typically talking about unpeated sherried whiskeys. Peated sherry whiskeys are one of my favorite categories because the way that the peat and the sherry can interact can be a very surprising and fun experience, and just generally speaking, really delicious. I know I'm not the only one that believes that. It's a very popular style of whiskey, and a lot of people get really excited. I'll say the Carchus 2024 release that we just reviewed a couple weeks ago. But really, up until now, you could have poured me a Tamdhu, a Glendronach, a Glenturret, or any of these other kind of sherry forward whiskeys. For the most part, particularly the well-presented ones at 46% non-chill filtered natural color. And yes, I know Glendronach is chill filtered, and at least sometimes anyway. But when you're talking about these kind of quality, well-presented, if not perfectly presented Scotch whiskeys, there are differences and subtleties, but for the most part, I'm going to be pretty equally as happy drinking all of them, and maybe not necessarily super excited for one brand over the other. But since this entire first year of my channel has been largely focused on maybe exploring areas that I've previously ignored or challenging my own personal biases and things, I should probably make it a bit more of a point to drink some more sherry forward whiskeys without big gaps in between, and try to figure out exactly what I feel about them overall and as a category. So we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the scoring and value and all that sort of stuff. But for now, let's talk about Tamdhu 15 and find out exactly what it is. To be honest with you, there's not a ton to say about this bottle that I haven't already said. Tamdhu is a Speyside distillery. It's owned by Ian and MacLeod Distillers. and it is aged in sherry oak casks. We don't really know anything else about the casking, whether there's a mix of Pedro Jimenez and Oloroso. Someone out there might, but just in terms of the general information out there, it just comes down to sherry oak casks. As I mentioned, it's bottled at 46%. It's non-chill filtered, and it is natural color. And this is coming in at about $130 from me locally. Your mileage may vary depending on where you live. However, I checked the Tamdhu website in the UK, and they have theirs listed at 110 pounds, which means at least currently I'm able to buy this for almost a 1-to-1 conversion rate in terms of dollars and pounds. 130 bucks plus tax is right in that area of 110 pounds, which includes tax. So yeah, at least for the time being, we're getting this without any super crazy premiums or gouging by the distribution system, at least for the time being. Again, maybe you're seeing some price increases where you are. Maybe you're still able to get it cheaper. However, I will say that I bought this particular bottle back in 2022 in the Chicago area because I couldn't find it anywhere else by me. And I paid 130 bucks. So it doesn't look like the price on these has shot up dramatically. Again, depending on where you live. All right, let's get into the nosing and tasting notes. But before I do, let me just say, again, a lot of times with these sherried whiskeys, I find there to be a lot of similarities, right? Sherry, particularly if it's Oloroso versus an Oloroso whiskey, are going to have oftentimes a pretty similar taste profile with some nuances between them. And I'll be the first one to admit that if I'm not drinking one right next to each other, I might not be picking up those specific nuances, but I'm going to do my best. All right, on the nose, let's see what we're getting today. So, no surprise, obviously sherried. This is a sherried for whiskey. Sherry bomb, it really is going to depend on your definition of that. For me, being at 46%, there's enough subtlety here where this isn't just a gloopy sherry whiskey. Obviously, you can see the color. It's got some really nice color to it, but it isn't this Coca-Cola bottle of whiskey that light cannot escape from. So, at least on the nose, you're getting some obvious but subtle sherry quality, right? Dried red fruits, nuttiness, raisins, figs, that sort of thing. I would say there is a bit more of a, at least from an American's perspective, like a bit of a barbecue style nose coming off of this thing. I think I was getting it a little bit more the other day when I was doing some tasting notes. But you're getting this combination of like sweet, tangy, and spicy, and everything is pretty dense and rich. I'm not finding them a lot right now, but the other night, as I mentioned, I was picking up a ton of like Luxardo cherries. And there is a pretty decent woodiness, kind of on the back of that barbecue type sensation. I'm talking about like a mesquite wood, not necessarily smoky, but what is left over after you've kind of smoked something with like a mesquite or hickory, which I'm not as familiar with. Let's go with mesquite for the time being, but I just eat barbecue. I have no idea how to actually do it. All right, see if there's anything else. Generally pretty well balanced. There is a spiciness, again, similar to that, kind of a well-made, like Kansas City style barbecue sauce, something that's kind of sweet, tangy, with just a little bit of a kick. There is a bit of barrel spice here, a little bit of cinnamon, maybe some black pepper. But generally speaking, it's pretty balanced, and it's what I expect from a quality sherry forward whiskey, with a few nuances separating it maybe from the other competitors in the same space. But with that, let's get to the palate. Cheers. So the big thing on the front of the palate with this one is a real fruit jam quality. Red fruits for sure. It's sweet. It's not overly sweet. There's richness here, maybe even more of a like a quality like gourmet fruit, dark fruit gummy or something like that. But that transitions into all of the spice and some wood tannins that really do help to break up what would otherwise be kind of a sticky fruit forward whiskey. The malt isn't completely lost. It's in there. You are able to pick up the fact that this is a Scotch whiskey. Again, it's not overly sherried forward, but I haven't drank a ton of Tamdhu, so it's really hard for me to pick out like the specific distillery character at this point. But there definitely is still some present maltiness and some vanilla that really comes across nicely. All right, sip number 2. Here we go. Yeah, there's some nuttiness up front with the vanilla. Then you get into the spice and wood, and then it can settle down into your chocolate-covered raisins, more baking spice, and that kind of wood tannin drying sensation that is pretty common, particularly I think when European oak is used. Again, all we know is sherry oak casks. We don't know necessarily whether it was American oak or European oak. Given the spice level on this, I would say it's probably European oak, although I'm not picking up a ton of the herbal quality that I often get on these styles of whiskey. So overall, I really like this. It's balanced, but it has some elements to it that really stick out, right? You're getting the kind of the jammy fruit, you're getting the real nice spicy, woody kind of back half mixed in with some other sweet flavors that are still hanging in there. The nose is nice, it's expected, it's familiar with some nice qualities. And I think the palate is probably about the same in terms of it's doing what you expect with just enough to kind of set it apart. Again, at least for somebody who doesn't spend a ton of time drinking this style of whiskey. So, score. I really had to stop and think about this for a second because just generally, I'm still sorting out the scoring thing. I've been talking about that basically since I started the channel. I'm gonna have to kind of really settle in, which I think I've done a better job at, except for when I bring in something that I haven't talked about a lot. Because it feels like, also considering what I said at the beginning of the video, where sometimes these whiskeys for me can be somewhat interchangeable in terms of my overall enjoyment, and you're really just talking about some different subtleties here and there that are setting them apart. It means that what score I give this is going to kind of set the bar, and a lot of those other whiskeys I'm going to have a hard time deviating from, at least for the time being, until maybe I spend some more focused time really trying to dig out the differences between all of these different Scotch whiskeys. As I mentioned with the 10-year-old peated whiskey, those official bottlings from Islay, or even like the Lechic 10 and that sort of thing, most of those all got 7 out of 10s, maybe all of them. Trying to remember off the top of my head. But yeah, it felt weird to score one higher or lower because really, from a quality perspective, they're all right there with each other. And you're really just talking about some different preferences in terms of smokiness and just the style of smoke that distillery tends to produce. I've also been completely ignoring the 6 out of 10 category, which is my above average, and there should be way more whiskeys in that 6 out of 10 category. I had a conversation with Kevin earlier in between these two videos, and something I had kind of known for a while, and he came out and he just said it, and it's like, yeah, there should be a lot more 6 out of 10 whiskeys, because that's probably where a huge chunk of these official bottlings really should lie, particularly if you're not talking about significant age statements and that sort of thing. So 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10, because that's really the debate here. Realistically, as much as I want to give this a 6 out of 10 to fill in that gap, I think this one legitimately is a 7 out of 10. It's quality. It's got some different flavors. The flavor journey is really nice. It's cohesive. It makes sense, but the whole thing isn't the exact same. The age on this is bringing out some really nice wood qualities without it being overly oaky or overly tannic. There's only a touch of herbalness, which tends to turn me off slightly if that is turned up too high. So yeah, I am gonna stick with a 7 out of 10 here. However, I do think this will probably end up being one of my all-around preferences in terms of the 12 to 15-year-old sherry forward official bottling range. All right, now a sticky subject when it comes to this. It's a sticky whiskey to begin with. Like I said, there's a nice jamminess to it, but probably one of the reasons that Tamdhu doesn't get talked about a lot, or maybe as much. It doesn't pop up on my radar quite as often as I would expect it to, in terms of me just being online and seeing the reviews that people are doing, or even seeing the subreddits and that sort of thing. And it's probably something to do with the price. As I mentioned, I paid $130 for this 2 years ago, and it doesn't look like the price has changed too much, and it feels like they probably, what Tamdhu or Ian McLeod may have done is something that it appears that a number of other distilleries have done over the last few years, and that is they saw the boom coming, and maybe their stocks were getting low, and they didn't want to lose their shelf space and that sort of thing. So they bump up the price. It's really expensive for a little while. Maybe overall sales slow down, but they're making up for it in some higher margins and let their stock catch back up. And all of these other brands that maybe didn't raise their prices a couple years back have had to over the last few years, and they aren't quite as out of whack as they used to be. Now, I can say that about the 15-year-old. However, the 18-year-old version is $240, which makes that $110 more for 3 extra years of age. That gets pretty tough just from a math perspective. Obviously, people are going to have their opinions on quality and which one they may prefer, but at something like an 80% price increase for an already expensive whiskey for just 3 more years of age, it's obviously what they're doing there. Again, they are trying to stick in that. They're trying to make sure that Macallan and Dalmore don't make them look like a budget brand. That's the way I tend to look at those sorts of things. Glendronach 18 is up in that $230, $240 range as well. It kind of is where these whiskeys are sitting. The 15s are still somewhat obtainable, but once you hit that 18-year-old age range, thanks to the ridiculous prices of the Dalmore 18 and the Macallan 18, the sherry forward whiskeys are trying to stay within shouting distance, I guess is the word I'm looking for, without being just egregiously expensive, knowing that their name can't carry them there yet. So at $130, obviously that puts this kind of even at the low range of some of the other 18-year-old whiskeys we reviewed earlier this year. $130 is kind of where it really starts for the 18-year-old category. And that's probably getting further and further from the truth every day. So the Glendronach 15 is $110. That was $90 a couple years ago. So that one is still cheaper. But once you get up into that range, does a difference in $20 make that big of a difference? If you have a strong preference for one or the other, maybe not. So definitely difficult to say that this is a good value, but just generally, try to take away the bias and all that sort of thing, it's kind of where the market's at. And yeah, it doesn't encourage me to buy more whiskey like this, because for $130, I can get some pretty nice bottles, especially if we're going to look at independents. Which reminds me, there is like an example that I wanted to show you. So this is a signatory vintage bottle of Glenlivet. It's a 46% edition. It's 12 years old, so 3 years younger than this. But I paid $60 for this not all that long ago. Maybe it would be $70 today. That's still $60 less than this. I can get 2 of these basically for pretty close to the price of this, and this bottle is fantastic. So if you're a big sherry lover and you keep your eyes out for bottles like this and you aren't obsessed with the 15-year-old age statement, you can get a whiskey that's probably at least as good as this Tamdhu 15. It won't be Tamdhu if you love Tamdhu and their style. Glenlivet's not going to reproduce that one for one, but for someone like me, I'm much more likely to buy sherried whiskeys like this than something like this, because it's probably not going to be a significant difference in terms of the flavor experience. And sometimes it's going to be just straight up better, and it's like half the price. So yeah, I know there's sherry lovers out there. There are people where that is their style of whiskey. If you're one of those, don't hate me. It's kind of where I am and where I've been. And maybe over the course of the fall here, as we lead up, especially towards Christmas time, it probably would behoove me to probably do some more reviews of sherried whiskeys, particularly the ones that are available and out there for people to buy, either for their parties or as gifts. So expect to see some of those over the next few months. And we'll see how much my preference changes with maybe a little bit more of a focus on trying these and picking out the differences between them. But yeah, let me know where you're at. Where do sherry forward whiskeys sit in your preferences? Where do you find the best value for these, particularly just considering that they do tend to be kind of the leaders in this inflation we've seen over the years, maybe just keeping up with the absurd kind of collector's market, investment market, that sort of thing, that we've seen driven by Macallan Dalmore, even other whiskeys, like whether it's Belvany or Glenfarclas. Although Glenfarclas really isn't ridiculous in and of themselves. But anyways, what's your sherry go-to? Where do you find the best value? What are your recommendations for someone who maybe doesn't see a ton of variation in terms of getting excited over picking up this bottle over that bottle? Give me some of your advice in terms of exploring this particular category a little bit, in a little bit more of a focused way, let's say. If you're new to the channel, please hit subscribe below. I really do appreciate it. We're kind of coming up on one of YouTube's first milestones, 500 subs. I think 3,000 watch hours. We're pretty close on both of those. Been a little bit of a trickle, a slow climb over the summer months, but we're still getting there. We're getting close. And I do appreciate everyone for all your support. Hit the like if you got to this point in the video. I hope you didn't hate watching it if you're still here. But until next week, everyone, thank you again for watching. Cheers.